All right, diving in today, folks. We're tackling something pretty meaty. The CIS Critical Security Controls, version 8.1. You sent this over, called it a guide to like all the cybersecurity best practices. And you weren't kidding. This thing is in-depth. So today, we're going on a mission. We're going to dissect this beast, pull out the really important stuff, make sure you understand the big picture.
Yeah, think of it like a map. You get the lay of the land.
Exactly. You see the key spots, the strategic points. You don't get bogged down in every single detail.
Right. No need to count every tree in the forest, just know the path. So that's what we're doing today. This is like your guided tour through the world of security, with an expert. And the CIS controls, they are comprehensive, but that's because they're built on a lot of agreement.
It's not just like one person's opinion, right? This isn't a single company's product.
Exactly. It's not one company. It's not one person. It's a whole bunch of people, a global community. You got experts in cybersecurity from everywhere.
Yeah, you've got private companies, government agencies, you name it. Everyone's contributing to this thing. That's got to give it some weight, right? Like real-world credibility.
It's not just theoretical. No, you got people on the front lines. Think about threat responders, people dealing with attacks every day. You got analysts looking for new patterns, new ways the bad guys are working, and technologists, the people building the systems, making sure they're secure. Then you got IT folks keeping the whole infrastructure running. Vulnerability researchers, the ones who find the cracks.
So it's like all this practical experience is baked right into this framework.
Yeah, that's what keeps it relevant. So, this whole collaborative thing, it's really the heart of why these controls work.
Now, it wasn't always this data-driven powerhouse, right? Like, rewind a bit, it started as a more, grassroots kind of thing.
Yeah, it was more informal, definitely. Back then it was about pinpointing, what are the most common attacks, and then figuring out, what are the practical things you can do to defend against them.
Okay, so how'd they make that jump, from good advice to this data-backed system?
Well, there was a big turning point, I'd say, around 2013. They started working with the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, the DBIR.
Right, yeah.
They took the findings from all that analysis and they mapped them carefully to the controls.
So it's not just, hey, patch your systems. They can say, look, here's how many breaches happened because of this.
It's real-world data, thousands of breaches, and it shows exactly how those unpatched things are exploited.
Okay, that adds some serious weight for sure.
Yeah.
Now, I also remember seeing something about a community defense model.
Oh, right, the CDM.
Yeah. What's the story there?
So that's the next step in this data-driven journey. They took the DBIR and then they added in data from the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. That's ISS for short.
Right.
They focus on threats to state and local governments, to tribal, territorial. The goal of the CDM, it's to figure out, what are the top 5 attacks, the ones that are most common and cause the biggest problems?
And then they use that to refine the controls.
Exactly. And to really understand, how those attacks work, they use MITRE ATT&CK. It's like a library of bad guy moves. It breaks down each step, each tactic and technique. So CIS, they look at the top attacks through the lens of ATT&CK. Then they can figure out, okay, which defensive actions, they call them safeguards, now actually work against this attack.
Wow, that's some serious analysis. So we're focusing on version 8.1.
Yeah.
What's the big deal with this update?
Well, 8.1, think of it as a refinement. They built on what they did in version 8, but with some key principles in mind. Context, clarity, and consistency.
All right, break this down for us.
So context is about making those safeguards practical. They give you examples, tell you how to actually implement them. Clarity is about making sure, that it aligns with other big security frameworks, but still keeping what's unique about CIS.
Gotcha. So aligning with NIST, but not losing its own flavor.
Exactly. And then consistency. That's about making the transition smooth for folks who are already using version 8. Like the structure, the approach, it's mostly the same.
No huge overhaul, just making it better.
Yeah, more user-friendly. Some key updates, they realign things to the NIST cybersecurity framework, CSF, especially the new version, CSF 2.0. So if you're using both, you can see how CIS fits in.
Makes sense, yeah.
They also, they expanded the glossary, like key terms, plan, process, sensitive data. They're all defined clearly now.
Sometimes those little things make a big difference, getting everyone on the same page.
Definitely. And they refined the asset classes, like how they connect to the
asset classes, that's different types of IT stuff, right?
Yeah. Exactly, like your computers, laptop servers, network gear, like routers and switches, software itself, data, even people like employees and contractors.
Yeah.
They made these categories more precise, so it's clear, which safeguard applies to what. For example, they separate portable devices like laptops from dedicated mobile devices like your smartphone because they have different security concerns.
Gotcha. More granular, more tailored. Now, in the intro to this document, they say the CIS controls are like more than a checklist. What's the thinking there?
It's about the whole ecosystem. Like, yeah, a list of recommendations is good, but CIS, they give you so much more. Think about it.
Yeah.
You're trying to implement a control, right? Where do you find training material? How did other companies do it? What tools are there? How do you measure progress? And how does this all fit in with all the regulations? CIS has resources for all of that.
They have mappings to those compliance frameworks, right?
Exactly. NIST, FISMA, ISO 27001, HiPay, PCI DSS, you name it. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you see how CIS helps you meet those requirements. They also have practical examples, guidance for different companies, big and small, even stuff to help you track your security metrics. It's about using the knowledge of the whole community to actually get more secure.
Right. So it's a living, breathing resource, not just a document to be filed away. Now, for someone coming to this for the first time, this document can be overwhelming.
Oh, for sure. That's exactly why they created implementation groups.
The IGs,
Yeah,
right.
It helps you prioritize, which safeguards are the most important for you right now. They look at your size, your risk, and the resources you have for security.
So a small nonprofit, they're not going to have the same needs as like a giant bank.
Not at all. They have 3 IGs. IG1, that's your essential cyber hygiene. It's the foundation, the things everyone should do, regardless of size or industry. Then you got IG2. That includes everything from IG1, but adds more controls. For companies that are a bit more complex, maybe they have some regulatory stuff to deal with.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's IG3. That's got everything from IG1 and IG2, but it's designed for the big players, those with a lot of regulations and facing, really sophisticated threats.
Okay, so a small business, they can focus on IG1 and make a real difference.
Definitely. The safeguards in IG1, they're picked because they're broadly applicable. You can do them without a whole team of security experts.
That's good to know. Okay, that's a good overview. Yeah. Now let's actually get into the nitty-gritty. What's a good place to start?
Well, the foundation of any good security program got to start with Control 1. Inventory and control of enterprise assets.
Inventory. That's just knowing what you have, right? Like what computers and software.
It might seem basic, but you'd be surprised how many places don't have a good handle on this. Like, they don't know all their devices, the ones connected to their network, physically, virtually, remotely, in the cloud, you name it. And guess what?
That's what the bad guys exploit.
You got it. You can't protect what you don't know you have. It's like trying to secure your house, but you have no idea where the doors and windows are.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, like if there's a rogue laptop or some unmanaged IoT thing or an unauthorized cloud instance, that's a blind spot.
A huge opening for attackers. And with today's IT, it's a moving target. You got employees with their own devices coming and going, then you got virtual machines, cloud stuff, all changing really fast. It's not like the old days where you just had a list of desktops and servers.
So it's a constant process, not a one-time thing. Now, what are the benefits of this? Aside from the obvious security stuff.
Well, a good inventory, it helps a lot with incident response. Like if you spot some weird traffic or some malicious activity, you got to quickly figure out where it's coming from. Same thing with software vulnerabilities. A new one gets announced, you got to know which machines are running that software. And it's not just security. It helps with things like managing your software licenses, figuring out if you need more capacity, even just basic IT troubleshooting.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we actually do this, like build this inventory?
Smaller places, they can start with network discovery scans. There's tools for that. And then check the logs from your key systems, like your anti-malware, your network switches, firewalls, those things. Look for anything you don't recognize.
Okay, so it's active searching, but also passive collecting information.
Yeah, make it a habit. Don't just do it once and forget about it. Now, bigger organizations, they'll use more powerful tools like enterprise IT asset management platforms. They can also get data from, their cloud providers and other systems they already have. Active Directory, SSO systems, MFA logs, VPN logs, MDM tools, even vulnerability scanners. CIS also talks about crowdsourcing asset information. Basically, you pull data from all these places and put it together.
So like if your network switch and your MDM tool both see the same device, you can be pretty sure it's real.
Exactly. It gives you a more complete picture. Now, there are a few safeguards under Control 1 that are pretty important.
Yeah, let's dig into those.
So Safeguard 1.2, address unauthorized assets. Basically, have a process, a written one, to deal with devices that shouldn't be on your network. Ideally, do this weekly. You find something unauthorized, you remove it, block it, or put it in quarantine until you figure out what it is.
Makes sense.
Then there's 1.3, utilize an active discovery tool. Use a tool to scan your network, find everything that's connected, daily scans, or even more often if things change quickly.
Got it.
And lastly, 1.4, use DHCP logging. Use the logs from your DHCP servers, the ones that give out IP addresses. This helps you track new devices that connect to the network.
All right, so active scanning, passive logging, and a process to deal with anything suspicious. That's a solid foundation. Let's move on to Control 2. Inventory and control of software assets. Why is this just as important as knowing our hardware?
Well, it's kind of like the physical world. You need to know what software you're running. Attackers, they're always out there scanning for weaknesses for specific versions of software with known vulnerabilities.
So if they find a system running an outdated version, it's a target.
A big one. Like imagine a user, they click on something bad, maybe a malicious link or file, and if their browser plugin is old, boom, the attackers are in.
And then from there, they can move around the network, get to the really valuable stuff.
Exactly. So patching is super important, but like we said with hardware, you can't patch what you don't know you have. A complete inventory is key for vulnerability management. Plus, it helps you find and remove software you don't need anymore.
Because even if you don't use it, it can still have vulnerabilities.
Right. It's a hidden risk. Now, CIS talks about allow listing. That's a pretty important strategy for software.
Can you explain that one?
Allow listing, it's about being proactive. You decide exactly which software is allowed to run, and then you block everything else. So even if something bad gets through your other defenses, it can't run if it's not on the list.
So how do you actually do that? What tools are out there?
Well, there are commercial products for that, but a lot of endpoint security suites, even some operating systems, they have allow listing built in. They use different ways to identify software, like the file name, the location, even a digital fingerprint.
A hash?
Yeah, a cryptographic hash. Some of the fancier tools, they even let you control things based on who's trying to run the software or even the time of day.
Okay, so there's a lot of flexibility there. Now, what about the safeguards under Control 2? Any ones we should highlight?
A few important ones. Safeguard 2.3, that's address unauthorized software. Same idea as with hardware. You find software that's not supposed to be there. You either remove it or document why it needs to stay, and then review those exceptions, at least monthly.
Okay, so regularly check that list.
Yep. Then there's 2.4, utilize automated software inventory tools. This one's all about using tools to do the heavy lifting for you. You don't want to be doing this manually.
Yeah, that sounds tedious.
And then 2.5, allow list authorized software, and 2.6, allow list authorized libraries. These are all about actually using that allow listing strategy we talked about. You set up your lists and then review them at least twice a year.
Make sure they're up to date. Okay, so we're tracking our software, we're controlling what can run, and we're dealing with unauthorized stuff. That's Control 2. Let's move on to Control 3, data protection. Yeah, this feels like it's at the heart of it all.
Absolutely. Data is often the crown jewel, It's what the attackers are after. They break in, they find the valuable data, and then they try to get it out.
Right.
And it's not always fancy attacks either. Sometimes it's simple mistakes, People accidentally sharing files, sending emails to the wrong person, or losing a device with sensitive data on it.
Yeah, we've all heard those stories. And of course, you have all the regulations about protecting data.
Exactly. Encryption is huge, of course. But good data protection, it starts with understanding your data. Like, where is it? What kind of data do you have? And how sensitive is it?
Okay, so CIS talks about a data management process. What's that all about?
It's a framework, It tells you how to handle data throughout its entire life. Like, you need to classify your data. Is it public, confidential, top secret? Then you figure out, okay, how do we protect it? How do we handle it? How long do we keep it? And how do we get rid of it securely?
So you're not just slapping a label on it. You're figuring out how to actually treat it.
Right. And a big part of this process is having a plan for when things go wrong, a data breach response plan. That should be part of your overall incident response plan.
So what about figuring out where all this data is? CIS mentions data inventory or mapping.
Right. That's about finding out what data you have, where it's stored, on servers, databases, cloud, wherever. And then you figure out which software applications are accessing that data.
So you can see, like, who's touching the sensitive stuff.
Exactly. The goal is to use this information for network segmentation. You basically create separate zones in your network based on how sensitive the data is, and then you can put stronger security controls around the most important data.
So like a bank vault for the really valuable stuff. What about specific safeguards under Control 3? Any highlights?
Several important ones. Safeguard 3.2, that's establish and maintain a data inventory. Create that inventory, keep it up to date, and focus on finding and labeling the sensitive data. Then you have 3.3, configure data access control lists. This is about using access controls to make sure people can only see the data they need for their job. No more.
Right, the principle of least privilege.
Exactly. 3.6, that's encrypt data on end-user devices. This is about protecting data on laptops, phones, the devices people carry around. If they get lost or stolen, that data is still protected.
Especially important these days.
And 3.7, establish and maintain a data classification scheme. That's about making sure you're actually using those data sensitivity labels we talked about. Review and update that scheme at least once a year or anytime you change how you handle data.
Gotcha.
They also mentioned Safeguard 3.14, log sensitive data access. That's more advanced. For IG3, it's about tracking, who's accessing, changing, deleting sensitive data.
Okay, so we're figuring out our data, we're labeling it, we're controlling access, and we're using encryption. That's a solid plan. Let's move on to Control 4. Secure configuration of enterprise assets and software. This one sounds a bit technical.
Well, it is, a bit. But it's super important. Think about when you set up a new server or you install some software. The default settings, they're often designed for, ease of use. They're not thinking about security first.
Makes sense.
Same with service providers. They want things to be flexible, so their product works for everyone. But that doesn't mean it's secure right out of the box. You might have default passwords that are easy to guess, a bunch of open network ports that you don't need, and vulnerable services running in the background. Attackers, they know these defaults. They scan for them.
So it's like moving into a new house and leaving the doors unlocked.
Exactly. You got to go in and secure it properly. And it's not just a one-time thing. Configurations can change, drift away from secure settings over time. Software gets updated. New vulnerabilities are found. People make changes, sometimes with good intentions, but maybe they don't realize the security implications.
Right. So you got to stay on top of it. So where do you begin with this?
CIS recommends starting with security baselines. There are publicly available ones, well-respected. The CIS benchmarks themselves, those are great. Detailed instructions on how to configure all sorts of systems. NIST has something similar, the National Checklist Program.
Okay.
You take these baselines and customize them for your needs, for your security policies and regulations. And anytime you deviate from the standard, you document it, explain why you did it.
So you're basically building a blueprint for a secure system.
Exactly. And then you make sure all your systems are following that blueprint. Any safeguards under this control that stand out.
Yeah, let's hear about those.
A couple that are really relevant these days. Safeguard 4.11, enforce remote wipe capability on portable end-user devices. That's for IG2 and IG3. It's about making sure you can remotely wipe laptops, phones, tablets, if they get lost or stolen.
Makes sense, especially with so much sensitive data on those devices.
Then there's 4.12, separate enterprise workspaces on mobile end-user devices. That's IG3. This one's about using features that create a separate space for work stuff on mobile devices. Like, Apple has user enrollment and managed open-in. Android has work profile.
So you can keep work and personal stuff separate.
Exactly. It helps prevent data leaks and makes it easier to manage security policies. The document also mentions briefly 4.6, securely manage enterprise assets and software. That one's all about using secure protocols like SSH and HTTPS for managing systems remotely.
All right, so we're securing our systems and we're making sure our mobile devices are locked down. Let's move on to Controls 5 and 6, account management and access management. Those sound pretty related.
They are, very much so. Control 5, account management, that's all about the life cycle of user accounts, creating them, keeping track of them, and importantly, disabling them when they're not needed anymore. when someone leaves the company. And Control 6, access management, builds on that. It's about controlling what those accounts can do, what systems they can access, what data they can see, and how we verify their identity, passwords, MFA, that kind of thing.
Makes sense.
These controls are really important because a lot of times it's easier for attackers to use stolen credentials than to hack through technical vulnerabilities.
Right, like weak passwords, accounts that are still active after someone leaves, sharing accounts, all that stuff.
It's low-hanging fruit for the attackers.
And how do the bad guys get those credentials?
Oh, lots of ways. Phishing attacks, tricking people into giving up their passwords, malware that steals keystrokes, sometimes just guessing. People use really predictable passwords.
So good account and access management, that's key. What are the best practices?
So for account management Control 5, it's about having a complete and accurate list of all your user accounts. Regular users, admins, service accounts. You review this list regularly, and if an account's not needed, you disable it. You also want to audit accounts periodically, make sure they're legit. And for admin accounts, the principle of least privilege is super important. Users should have separate non-admin accounts for their day-to-day work, and they should only use their admin accounts when they absolutely need to. Now, for access management Control 6, that's all about controlling, what each account can actually do.
Right.
A big part of this is role-based access control, or RBAC. You give people access based on their job role. And you need good processes for granting and revoking access. When someone joins the company, changes roles, leaves the company, all that. Same for contractors and temporary workers.
Makes sense.
It also helps to centralize access control. Use a directory service like Active Directory or maybe a single sign-on provider that makes it easier to manage, across a bunch of applications.
And MFA, multi-factor authentication, that seems to be a big theme here.
Absolutely. It's essential, especially for anything exposed to the internet, for remote access and for admin accounts. CIS even gives guidance on which MFA methods are stronger, like using a TOTP app is better than SMS or push notifications. But, any MFA is better than just a password.
Right. Anything to make it harder for the bad guys.
So really sensitive accounts, they also recommend using privilege access management tools, PAM tools, and jump boxes or bastion hosts. That's another way to isolate and control access to, really important systems.
All right, so we're managing our accounts carefully, we're controlling who can access what, and we're using MFA wherever we can. Now let's move on to Controls 7 and 8. Continuous vulnerability management and audit log management. These seem to be about finding and analyzing potential problems.
Yeah, you could say that. Continuous vulnerability management, that's Control 7. It's about actively looking for weaknesses in your systems, in your software, your operating systems, your network devices, and then you got to fix them. And audit log management, Control 8, that's about collecting, storing, and analyzing all those logs from your systems.
So you can spot suspicious activity.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's a common problem, Companies collect tons of logs because they have to for compliance, but they don't actually look at them. And guess what? Attackers know that. They rely on it to stay hidden.
So it's not enough to just scan for vulnerabilities or collect logs. You got to actually do something with that information.
Right. For vulnerability management, you're using automated tools to scan your systems regularly. CIS recommends tools that can map their findings to those industry standard vulnerability databases like CVE, CVSS.
Okay.
And you want to do authenticated scans. That's where the tool logs into the system with credentials, gives you a much more thorough picture.
Makes sense.
Once you find vulnerabilities, you got to prioritize which ones are most likely to be exploited, which ones would cause the most damage. The CVSS score can help with that. And then you fix them as quickly as possible. Automated patching is really helpful here.
And for audit log management, what's important there?
Well, you want to enable logging on as many systems as you can, and then send those logs to a central place, maybe a log management server or a SUM system. That's a security information and event management system.
Okay.
This lets you aggregate all the logs, analyze them, and keep them for a while. CIS makes a distinction between system logs, which track operational events, and audit logs, which track user activity, security events, and configuration changes. Both are really important for understanding what's going on in your environment and for figuring out what happened after an incident.
Right. Logs are like the breadcrumbs.
Exactly. They can tell you a lot. Now, there are a few key safeguards for these controls.
Let's hear them.
For vulnerability management, you got 7.4, perform automated application patch management. 7.5, perform automated vulnerability scans of internal enterprise assets. And 7.6, perform automated vulnerability scans of externally exposed enterprise assets. These are all about automation and regular scanning.
So you're on top of it.
And 7.7, remediate detected vulnerabilities. That one's about actually fixing the problems you find.
Got it.
Now, for audit log management, you have 8.1, collect audit logs, and 8.3, ensure adequate audit log storage. Those are the basics.
Right.
Then there's 8.4, standardized time synchronization. This one might seem small, but it's important for making sure the timestamps on your logs are accurate. If you're trying to correlate events across different systems, you need the times to match up.
Right. Makes sense.
And then there's 8.11, conduct audit log reviews, and 8.1, collect service provider logs. The last one's for IG3. These are all about actually looking at the logs, looking for suspicious activity.
Okay, so we're scanning for vulnerabilities, we're patching, we're collecting logs, and we're analyzing them. But it's a lot of proactive work.
Yep.
Let's move on to controls 9 and 10. Email and web browser protections and malware defense. These sound like they're focused on everyday threats.
They are. Email and web browsers, those are the main ways attackers get in. They use social engineering like phishing, and they try to deliver malicious code through those channels.
Okay.
So you need strong technical controls, but you also need to train your users.
Right. Got to make them aware.
So for email, CIS recommends more than just basic spam filtering. You want malware scanning at the email gateway, SPF, DKIM, and DMRC to prevent spoofing, encryption for sensitive emails, and maybe even limiting what kinds of file attachments are allowed.
A lot of layers there.
And user training is key. Teach them how to spot phishing emails and make it easy for them to report anything suspicious. Now, for web browsers, it's about making sure people are using supported, up-to-date browsers. Use DNS filtering, network-based URL filtering. Those block access to bad websites. And be careful with browser extensions. Those can be risky.
And then there's malware defense, control 10.
Yeah.
What are the key things there?
Well, you got to have anti-malware software on all your devices and make sure it's updating its signatures automatically. You also want to disable auto-run and autoplay for removable media, like USB drives. That prevents malware from spreading automatically. And enable those anti-exploitation features in your operating systems. DEP, WDEG on Windows, SIP, and gatekeepers on macOS. Those can help stop malware from exploiting vulnerabilities.
Okay, so a lot of preventative measures there. What about the safeguards?
For email and web browser protections, you have 9.1, ensure use of only fully supported browsers and email clients. 9.2, use DNS filtering services. And 9.3, that's maintain and enforce network-based URL filters. That one's IG2 and IG3. For malware defense, you got 10.1, deploy and maintain anti-malware software. 10.2, configure automatic anti-malware signature updates. Those are like the must-haves.
Right.
Then there's 10.3, disable auto-run and autoplay for removable media.